Before scoring the winning goal against Ghana in the United States' opening game of the 2014 World Cup, backup defender John Brooks had a dream about it. Now the subconscious works in funny ways, and maybe his dream was a product of so many "I believe that we will win" chants. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that somehow I got the feeling John Brooks would score that goal too. The whole process of getting to Brazil wasn't as easy as I had initially expected. First, you need a visa before you can be admitted into the country, and that's not a process I'm used to going through when traveling. Second, even flights to Brazil's largest cities, some of the largest in South America, mind you, can be costly and impractical, at least from Los Angeles. So, what are the odds that I could win these tickets to be at this game, in this country, in this city? Everything was just too perfect for him to miss. But this isn't where I want to begin my story in Brazil. Instead, let's start here. 3 a.m. in the Natal airport. After the game against Ghana, Tim and I have to catch a flight to Rio De Janeiro, where we'll be staying for the remainder of our trip. I still haven't quite figured out why the only practical options we had to fly to Brazil's second most populous city, mind you, were 1 a.m., 3 a.m., or 10 p.m. My first instinct was that maybe we just booked our tickets too late, and these were the only options that were left. But if you look at the flight times even today, these times that I just mentioned are still the most available times. Despite our 3 a.m. departure time, and thankfully just one layover in Brasilia, we finally arrive in Rio. So what's the first thing you should do when you get to Rio? Well, if you're coming from Natal, probably take a nap. But after that, I'd say hit the beach. And I hear there's a few famous ones here in Rio. We decided to start off with none other than Copacabana. Many words have already been written by writers far greater than myself about the sun, sand, and, swimwear here. I'll just say that Copacabana lives up to its reputation. To make it even more of a destination for us while we're in town, FIFA has set up a fan center right on the beach, complete with World Cup viewing. So naturally, after some exploring, we decided to check it out. You know what? I'm not gonna lie. This little trip to Copacabana had me feeling pretty good about the city. I mean, really, with the sun shining down like this, what more could you ask for? But what if the sun isn't shining? It actually rained more than we bargained for during much of our stay in Brazil, including Natal, but I'll get into that a little later. Fortunately, at least in Rio, I was prepared with a backup plan for if it rained. Rio is actually home to several museums, which on a rainy day like this, might be the only time you would ever actually visit them. In an attempt to stay as dry as possible, we take a taxi to downtown Rio. That drops us off right outside the Museu Nacional de Belas Artes. As we walk to the museum, there appears to be a fair amount of tourists who look like they have the same idea as we do, all searching for a suitable indoor activity on a rainy day. However, as we make our way to the museum itself, we quickly discover that it's closed. This seemed a bit odd to us at the time, as it was a Thursday, and it wasn't like there was any games being played in Rio that day. Undeterred, we continue our search, as there are several museums located downtown. One of them has to be open, right? And it's here that we encounter our first World Cup protesters. Not that we actually saw any of them, as we would later discover, all museum workers had gone on strike over the past few weeks leading up to the World Cup. And apparently, they were still on strike when we showed up on this fateful rainy day. And although I can understand the strikes and the protests from the people of Brazil, the frustrating thing for us is that this is our backup plan. We don't have another plan after this. And with no real way to check the internet while we're out, we had no real way of knowing the futility of our searches that day. Needless to say, everything was closed. And after walking around downtown in the rain for most of the day, we decided to go back to the hotel, determined to make the next day count even more. We have to. Tomorrow is our last day in Rio. and we have to fit in both Christ the Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain. And here's where things get interesting. Other than the World Cup, the thing that I'm looking forward to most while in Brazil is partaking in the opposing views of both Corcovado, which is home to Christ the Redeemer, and Sugarloaf Mountain. Our tickets for the train to the top of Corcovado were originally scheduled for around 4 p.m. on our first full day in the city. But by this time, the clouds had already moved in for the day, and we were told that there would be no visibility at the top of the mountain. Luckily, or so we thought at the time, we were advised that our tickets would still be good if we came back at a later time, when the weather might be clearer. The next day, it rained, as you know. So that left Friday, our final day in the city, as our final chance to see both. We arrived at the train station around 10:30, only to immediately discover that the place was packed. The next available train with any empty seats wasn't until 6 p.m. Nope. This was unacceptable. We had to get up to the statue earlier than that. Sunset in Rio is around 5 to 5:30, and if we had gone at 6, it would have been dark by the time we got up there. Solution: there were buses leaving around every 5 minutes, taking people up there. Bam, do it, problem solved. But by then, there was already a 45-minute line to get bus tickets. Who cares? It's still quicker than waiting on the train. What they didn't mention to us is that the buses only take you halfway, where you then have to buy tickets to get into the national park that holds the statue. Another 45-minute line? Nah, don't even worry about it. It's still faster than waiting on the train. Plus, we're halfway there. As we waited in line for the park tickets, I saw another line out of the corner of my eye. What's that line, I wonder? It's the line for the shuttle to the top? I overhear another fellow line waiter say. Probably just another 45 minutes, I think to myself. I could not have been more wrong. After getting our park tickets, we proceed to join the back of the line to get on the shuttles that would take us the rest of the way up. And this thing just kept on going, and going, and going. What I would have done for any sort of Disneyland type sign that said 1 hour from this point, 45 minutes from this point. But no. You take your spot at the end of the line with no idea how long you'll be waiting for. 45 minutes go by and we move like 10 feet. Not an exaggeration. Another 30 minutes, another 5 feet. The progress is excruciatingly minimal. And now I'm starting to doubt if we'll be able to make it to Sugarloaf Mountain today as well. Meanwhile, there's taxis and cars trying to get by you and each other on this narrow road, and then there's the nagging reminder from the guys that sold you the park tickets that there's no visibility today, and that does not entitle you to a refund. Another 30 minutes go by, and we've gone another 20 feet, maybe. Forget Sugarloaf, we're not making it. I'm starting to question whether we'll even make it to the statue before it's dark. At this point, I'm tired of standing in line, I'm hungry, and now I'm wondering, is this even worth it? Well, about an hour later, I have my answer. Look, it's not fun waiting in line over 3 hours, in a drizzle, with little food. But ultimately, if that line that you're waiting in leads to the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, do it. Yes, it's worth it. Without a doubt, best views of the trip. And some of the best views I've ever seen. That being said, if you do find yourself waiting to visit the Christ the Redeemer statue, here's what I would have done differently. Number 1, take the train. As we learned in hindsight, we probably should have just risked the visibility issue in the beginning, as this is most likely the quickest way to the top. Number 2, get there early. This applies to whether you're taking the train or doing the bus route. I'm guessing most of the problems we encountered with the lines could have been avoided had we beaten the crowds. Number 3, bring something to eat. Yes, they have food at the top, but it's the in-between waiting stages that are going to get you. Also, I would say bring something substantial, as you never know how long the line will take. Ultimately, just remember, you are waiting in line for one of the 7 modern wonders of the world. If there wasn't a line, you'd probably be a little surprised, right? In my opinion though, in the end, yeah, it's worth it. This would essentially end our trip in Brazil. But, as I mentioned before, there's still some story left I want to tell. And for that, we have to go back to the beginning. back to Natal. Located in the northeast part of the country, near the equator, Natal is famous for its 300 days of sunshine a year. Which is why I found it incredibly ironic that it rained for the first day and a half after our arrival. Look, I'm from Florida, so I'm used to a little rain. But not this consistent, non-stop shit. It let up for a brief period the first full day we were there, and Tim and I took advantage as best we could, exploring Ponte Negra Beach and an up-close view of Morro do Careca, but the rains just kept coming down, and we spent much of our time confined indoors. Luckily, graciously, and despite what the weather forecast actually said, the clouds opened up the following day, and we were able to get in some pretty good exploring. In addition to sunshine, Natal is famous for the dunes that line its beaches, and Genipabu has some of the most renowned. Now, even with the sun out, the constant rain from the past couple of days had flooded many of the smaller roads that led out to a lot of these beaches, meaning that we needed an expert cab driver to navigate the back roads to get us to our final destination. And it's here where our luck improved, even more so than we had expected. Not only did our cab driver speak relatively good English, but he knew just the back roads to take to get us to where we needed to go. And trust me, on these back roads, we needed an expert. I must say, this was one of the coolest cab drivers I've ever had. He was even gracious enough to be our guide for the rest of the day. He let us pass the numerous buggy drivers, no doubt a little more anxious to make up for a lack of tourist bucks after these last couple days of rain. The thing is, most cab drivers, and most Brazilians for that matter, were very friendly. Tim and I took a lot of cabs on this trip, and I would say almost a quarter of the time the cab driver would shake my hand as we left. Most Brazilians were quite happy to hear what little Portuguese I knew. And I'm not talking a whole lot. Most of them seem to realize that Portuguese is hardly a universal language, and as such, education is an important issue for many of the Brazilians that I spoke with, an issue that seemed to clash directly with the World Cup that we were there to see. But that's something I learned a little later in the trip. Today, everyone just seemed grateful for the sunshine. And I'm thankful to a taxi driver, whose name I never knew, who I can only say, Obrigado, senhor. Até logo. Finally, it's here. Game day. USA versus Ghana. It all comes down to this. As we make our way to Arena das Dunas with some other American supporters, we quickly cross paths with a large group of Ghanaian fans. And let me just say, they couldn't have been a more jovial group. A true class act. And I tip my hat to them. You couldn't have asked for much more in terms of atmosphere for this event. I mean, it's the World Cup. It doesn't get much better than this. At least if you were lucky enough to get something to eat. By the time Tim and I got inside, an hour and a half before kickoff, mind you, they had already run out of most food. We had to resort to gas station-style turkey sandwiches. Ugh, blech. Those things are still giving me nightmares. But whatever hurdles these were, they began to fade during warm-ups. And by the time the national anthem came around, they were all but forgotten. If you're watching this, you probably saw what a great game this was. How the US went up early, only to see two of its starters go down to injury by the second half, and how they would relinquish the lead in what looked to be another disappointing result against the Black Stars, only to see them grab the lead once again, off a header from that now famous backup defender, John Brooks. But how you and I viewed this game, and the rest of the World Cup for that matter, was probably very different than how the Brazilians who played host to the tournament viewed it. Look, don't get me wrong. For every Brazilian I spoke to, Soccer is undeniably king, but the World Cup, FIFA, not so much. Many of the Brazilians I spoke with questioned whether the money spent on hosting the games might have been better used to improve education, or healthcare, or the overall safety of the country. Safety was one of the issues Tim and I considered before coming to the country. Arriving in both Natal and Rio, it would take some settling in, but we would eventually feel safer in certain areas. But then we might have a conversation with a local who would say that in some areas it's actually becoming more of a concern. That it's no longer they know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who got mugged. Now it's some of their immediate friends with this problem. And to these people, and every other Brazilian who wishes more for their country, I apologize that this documentary isn't as hard-hitting as maybe you think it should be. Admittedly, I wasn't prepared to go in that direction. I can only wish for you the feeling I got from this game on a cool, cloudy night in Natal. Because to me, this game was glorious. It was everything I hoped it could be. It was everything I dreamed of.